everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Matt Taglia, Senior Director of Emerson College Polling. Matt, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me again.
What an exciting night. Probably our most exciting conversation to date. The day is finally here. It is election night. I want to tag where we are right now. We are currently in the 8 p.m. hour. Polls are closing all throughout the country. And I want to know, what are you seeing? What sticks out to you?
Yeah, so I think the big states we're watching here right now, Georgia and North Carolina. I think at this moment, Harris has a lead in North Carolina. These are still really early returns. We probably won't know, really who's ahead until a couple hours from now. But we're watching these two states. I'm not sure that the Harris team is necessarily seeing the results they want, especially in Georgia. Some of the exit polling that we saw from CNN and others wasn't necessarily favorable to Harris. That does not mean that that is reality and that is what's going to transpire in the election tonight. But right now it's still very early. But the returns are coming in, and they're more or less lining up in a lot of cases with the 2020 results. We're continually comparing them to the 2020 results. So, nobody make any conclusions yet, but we're getting there.
Because if you can remember from 2020, I mean, the race wasn't called until that Saturday. So now I'm just thinking about, when am I going to have my next coffee, because you're saying that. But when you're stacking up the results, Harris compared to Biden, Trump compared to where he was in 2020, is it looking pretty comparable? Is someone outperforming the last performance? What does that look like?
So right now, I think it is pretty comparable. It's not really apples to oranges, because the problem that we have is that, certain counties are reporting, a certain number of their vote, while other counties haven't reported anything at all. And that goes for both North Carolina and Georgia. And we'll see that throughout the evening tonight. We're going to see a lag between some of these counties, and we don't necessarily know what was early vote versus what was election day vote. And that's kind of important. Because if we have all of the early vote in, and that's been reported in one place, then we'd expect to see something different in the election day vote in most cases, and especially in some of these counties that are in the suburbs that have maybe swung between Clinton and Trump and Biden, and now potentially for Vice President Harris. So I don't know. It can be very complicated, but I think we pay attention to the sort of general suburban turnout, how that's looking. Trump will have to do better in the suburbs than he did in 2020, especially in the Atlanta metro area when we're talking Georgia, and then in North Carolina in the sort of Charlotte metro, as well as the Raleigh triangle area, and then to some degree in the triad as well. So those are also usually the slowest to report. So we could see phantom leads here and there. But as I said, right now we see Harris is leading in North Carolina, at least as I say this. That could flip at any second. So I expect there to be some back and forth over the next few hours. It's going to be a long night, Brittany.
It's going to be a long night indeed, but I want to remind our viewers where we are. It is just after 8 p.m. on the East Coast, but as of right now, it doesn't seem like there are many surprises. I mean, Vermont went to Harris, West Virginia and Kentucky went Trump. None of those battleground states have been called yet. So as we sit here, does it look like the polls were right? Does it look like it is that too close to call race that we've all been anticipating?
Well, I sure hope so, for our own sake.
For your job, yes.
That's just a selfish plug. But right now it does look like that, and that's despite some of the exit polls showing otherwise. I think right now it looks like the race is too close to call. Yes, we've got some of those expected results. Right now, looking at Florida, that is lining right up with some of the later polls in the election cycle. I think right as I say this, Trump was up about 8 points or so. Don't take that as gospel, but we expected that Trump would win that race and by a substantial margin. We see that happening. There's nothing that is surprising there. Same goes for the Senate race a little bit further down the ballot. So yeah, right now things are looking good for the polls. I say that with fingers crossed and toes crossed, but yeah, I do expect that by the end of the night, by the end of tomorrow night, who knows when, but I think we will see close results in most of these battleground states.
We know that this is a game of math. It's a game of who can reach 270. And when we sit here as of right now, I know you said that this could flip on a dime, but as we sit here at 8 p.m. on Tuesday night, what does each pathway to victory look like, and who has the better or like more probable path?
We'll definitely need to see at least some returns out of Pennsylvania until we can start assigning those probabilities. I've said before, and I maintain that former President Trump has the slightly easier path here, I think. The polling has shown him with very slight leads in some of these states. If he can win the state of Pennsylvania, then it's highly likely that he wins the race. That state is crucial to both teams here, but it becomes increasingly difficult from that sort of math perspective for Harris to win these southern states. Counterintuitive. It's possible, and we've seen in some cases where she's leading in some of these southern states while not necessarily leading, maybe being tied in Pennsylvania. So it's certainly possible, but that just sort of doesn't really gel necessarily with the history of these states electorally. So if Trump does win Pennsylvania, I think that he has an extremely good shot of winning the presidency overall, and it makes the math even harder for Harris. If she wins Pennsylvania, there is the possibility that she loses another state in the so-called Rust Belt, like Wisconsin. I think Michigan, we've seen pretty good numbers for her. She probably stands to win there, but Wisconsin has been consistently tied. There have been large polling misses there over the past 8 years, and so that's a state that's going to be crucial to her. Assuming she doesn't win these southern states in the Sun Belt region, then that could tank the whole thing for her.
I know you said earlier in the conversation that the numbers coming out of Georgia as of right now weren't exactly what she would want to see. So as we sit here, if you're the Harris campaign, what are you thinking? If you're the Trump campaign, what are you thinking? Who's happier right now?
If I'm the Harris campaign, I'm still thinking it's early. And the returns are not necessarily matching up with the exit poll. And that's something that I think she should be happy about, because we are seeing in some of these ex-urban counties, we'll call them, around the Atlanta metro area, we're seeing very similar numbers to 2020, and sometimes Harris improving on Biden's numbers. Now, that doesn't necessarily hold, and it doesn't necessarily mean that she's going to win these suburban counties, or that she's going to have the turnout necessary in some of the urban counties to win the state. But, there are data points there that, if I'm the Harris team, I can look at and say, hey, we're still in this. Now, the Trump team, I think that they're honestly in a similar place that the Harris team is. I think that they're also very nervous because, they're seeing the same thing. They probably saw the exit polls, and they've been through this before. They had 2016, they had 2020, 2020 especially being a bit of a so-called red mirage. And I think at least some on the team have learned the lessons from that of celebrating too early. So I think both sides are most likely pretty nervous, and they are probably reserving judgment until they see more returns. And frankly, I think that's the right path to take here.
Can you explain that red mirage concept and why we could potentially be seeing it?
Yeah, so it's something that it's harder to predict these days because of the changes in the ways in which we vote. So 2020, we had a record-breaking numbers of absentee and early voters, but especially absentee voters. And in some election cycles, we have seen a red mirage or a blue mirage, and it's dependent upon state. But In other words, you get a lot of ballots that are for one side or the other, and they come in very early, and those are the first counties to report. So those counties are typically more rural. You can see a big lead for Trump. We saw that in 2020 in Georgia. We saw a lead for him initially, and that was due to the rural counties reporting all of their numbers much faster than the core metro counties reporting their numbers, where there are more Democratic votes. We see that in some other states as well. It really varies by election law and typical styles of voting in these states, but that's one thing that I think that the Trump team did learn their lesson on, not to get too excited when you see such positive early one way or the other.
Matt, I don't want to speak for you, but I know for me at least, this is like my Super Bowl election night. And most Americans are glued to the TV, glued to Forbes Breaking News YouTube channel, glued to some sort of news outlet trying to get all the data in as polls close and votes get counted. But I know you said it was going to be a late night, but just how late do you think it will be tonight? Is it going to be a nail biter till 1 a.m.? Are we not going to know tonight? Based on these early numbers, what do you think?
I do think it's going to be a nail biter until 1 a.m. I think that is largely due to the state of Pennsylvania. I don't think that they're going to have the majority of their vote counted before that 1 a.m. mark. They may be over the 50% mark at that point, but there were far fewer absentee ballots in Pennsylvania than there were in 2020. They're going to be relying more on election day votes. If the margins are narrow enough, then we're going to start getting into provisional ballots, ballot curing, that sort of thing. So again, those core metro Philadelphia, Pittsburgh precincts, they might be slower to report than some of these more rural areas. So I really think it depends on the state of Pennsylvania. If somehow they are able to get their vote counted very quickly, then it could be a quick night. But I don't see that happening. I would be surprised if that does happen. I think it might be tomorrow even before we have a really good idea of where the state of Pennsylvania stands.
So everyone, grab your second cup of coffee while we're keeping our eye on the Keystone State. Matt Taglia, it was a pleasure talking with you tonight. I hope we can speak in the near future about the results as more come in or tomorrow and break them down. Thank you so much for joining me.
I hope so too. Thanks, Brittany.